You're listening to the PR Wind Down Podcast, the podcast for public relations professionals that are ready to see real change in the PR industry. Here are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooling.
All right. Welcome back. You're listening to the Trust Relations PR Wind Down. I'm April White, the founder and president of Trust Relations.
And I'm Laura Schooler.
Hey, and our guest today is Christopher Tompkins, the CEO of The Go Agency, an online marketing specialist. He is here to discuss the intersection of digital marketing with social media and PR and how they can amplify each other.
We also have the PR news, fails, and scary stories that you don't want to miss.
Let's get ready to wind down. So we're going to start with our anonymous horror story, Laura.
Yes. Okay. My first agency job was working with a small boutique agency near Los Angeles. I was really excited about the opportunity because the CEO I would be working with seemed like she would have been able to teach me a ton about the industry and had worked with some really big names. When I initially was hired, she was kind enough to take me under her wing and teach me a ton about PR for the first month or two. Eventually, our moments working together seemed like they were less about teaching me to be a better PR pro and more about her bragging about her own accomplishments and the amount of money she was making.
Oh.
Eventually, she ended up telling me that she no longer had the time to mentor me and left me to fend for myself. I ended up figuring things out and was able to teach myself, but couldn't help feel like I had just been ghosted the same way you could get ghosted by a new person you're dating.
Ooh.
And that's the story.
Wow. That's really interesting.
The thing that strikes me the most of all of it is that like some CEO is telling some very junior person how much money they make. What the hell?
It's very weird.
I don't tell anybody how much money I make. Because then I'm afraid they're going to ask me to borrow it.
No,
but that's me.
It's not a good idea. I mean,
But like to be like to, you know, I mean, who knows, the CEO of a company, like to some, 23-year-old who's making like, I don't know, 40, 50 grand to be like, well, I made $250,000 last quarter. I mean,
That's pretty gross.
Obviously this person had a bit of an ego problem.
It does sound like that. What I'm curious about is, did it kind of go south, the relationship, and then the CEO didn't really want to handhold anymore, or was it a situation where the CEO just didn't really have time to do it, but sort of started out doing it and then ran out of steam?
Right, definitely. Like there's obviously both sides. Like the CEO might be like, oh my God, this kid was such a pain in the neck. I couldn't like deal with him anymore. But the fact that she talked about how much money she made, that's...
Yeah.
So I always have, my story that fits into some hard story. So I worked at a big company for a guy who I think like after 2 months of being there, and I was in my 20s, he told me I was no longer allowed to ask any questions. I swear to God, I'm not even like shortening or like, putting my twist on it. That's what he said. He said, nope. You're not allowed to ask any more questions about work.
Wait, okay, so were you asking way too many before and you were kind of like a needy young thing, or?
No, I wasn't super young. I was in my late 20s, but I just started at this big company. It was the first in-house job I had ever had, and it was a publicly traded company. There's a lot to that. And he knew where I had worked at agencies and in the government, but that wasn't even the thing. What was really the thing with him is he would be privy to all sorts of information and be invited to all kinds of meetings, because he was like a senior person and I was, some junior person. And so he would get mad at me for not knowing information that he had learned in meetings that I was not allowed to go to.
I see. So you weren't even allowed to ask questions. It wasn't just questions about how to do your job. It was questions that were inherently necessary to know the answers to in order
Yes,
to conduct your job properly.
Right. It was way more about the content of what was going on in the company, not about like, how do you do PR? It was like, okay, well, what deal is that? Or when does that go out? Or who should I talk to about this new client or whatever? And he would get mad at me. And I'm like, but you were in the meeting where they told you that and you get the briefs. I don't. So the funny thing with that is, he didn't even pretend that he wanted to mentor me in the beginning. He just like right out of the gate was a nightmare. And I knew it. I knew it when I took the job, but I needed to like move from where I was. And like the job was very interesting and enticing to me, you know, in and of itself.
Yeah.
So, but I knew it was not a match made in heaven. And it wasn't just not a match made in heaven for me. It was not a match made in heaven for anybody who was beneath him, you know, like of a lower rank level. Horrifying. He, you know, went on to other things, and somebody who worked for me was getting a new job, and when she told me where it was, I realized she was going to work for him. And I was like,
did you say something?
I did. I was like, oh no. And I said it on like a conference call, and I go, look, I would never have said anything normally because, you know, whatever, a job is a job, but this is a big one, man. I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And she was like, and anyway, I guess she didn't have to work directly, like, you know, for him. But He was, you know, a senior person at the place. And yeah, I mean, surprisingly, he hadn't changed one bit.
Right.
Like his reputation, you know, he is who he is.
I'm sorry to hear that. So Laura, have you ever had a good mentor in PR that kind of took you under their wings?
Yes, I remember Chris Atkins.
Of course. And
Chris
Paul Rosenbrand. And Paul, yep. Right. Well, at least you've had those good mentors.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I hate to say it, but that's more than a lot of people can say.
I suppose. But that's kind of a bummer that this person who wrote in, to get back to that, had a mentor who then quickly floated away.
It is sad. Yeah, it's an unfortunate chain of events. It looks like we have Chris Tompkins with us. Hey, Chris.
What up?
How are you? Nice to see you.
I'm good. Good to see you as well.
Everyone, welcome Chris Tompkins. He is the CEO and founder of the Go Agency, which is a full-service sales and marketing company. He's also the author of The Go Method, 22 Simple Steps to Creating a Social Media Strategy That Works! And, exclamation point is important, and host of the highly popular webcast, The Social Marketing Academy. So part of the reason that I invited Chris on is that Laura and I had a conversation in a previous podcast about how all of these things happen on social media that have PR angles or implications. So one of them we talked about recently was Sarah Silverman. She was calling Facebook and some other big giants to the carpet about making sure that they gave all their employees the election day off in support of democracy. And so there was kind of a PR angle there where people were piling on to get attention. And so we've had some of those conversations, and we talked about Mr. Peanut, which you probably heard about Baby Peanut becoming Junior Peanut and the cancel Baby Peanut, or whatever it was, the cancel Peanut campaign happening on social that looked more like it was sort of a digital stunt of sorts than something legitimate. And then I know, Chris, we've talked about, okay, well, there are certain clients where if you don't have, if the goal here is getting sales leads and you don't have digital marketing happening alongside PR and you're leaning on PR specifically for lead gen, what do you do? Like, that's not going to happen.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, exactly. So I know that I'm just setting the stage there for a conversation around all those pieces, because I'm curious both, you know, at what point does a client know that they need digital marketing as part of the mix and not just PR? And then also at what point can PR and social media kind of, you know, together create magic that amplifies what each sector is doing?
Yeah, you know, the first thing is, why are they choosing PR? Why are they choosing social media? It's generally that they're looking at what they're doing currently and they're seeing that there's a hole in their overall marketing structure, and they feel that it can be solved by including one thing. But when they include that one thing, whatever that, that diamond, that nugget is that's going to be the be all and end all of their campaign, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think I was telling you, April, like someone came to me and they'll be like, hey, Chris, I need a Facebook page. I'm like, that's adorable. What are your business goals? I mean, what do you want to achieve? Like, is just because like, oh, well, I heard that, a lot of our target audience is on the Facebooks. And I'm like, okay, all two of them. They don't understand. It's almost like someone's gotten their ear. And this is what we had a lot. I'm sure we can all speak to this. That have you ever had to field a sales call from someone that their boss came back from a conference, and at the conference it said social media or PR is the new thing, and then they task the junior to go get a PR campaign, and it's basically they don't know what it is, they don't know why they need it, but they just know that they need it. What I find is through the approach that I have is I try to consult the client. So like, oh, Facebook, let's just put a pin in that for what are your business goals? What are you trying to achieve? Why are you doing what you're doing? And trying to get into that messaging strategy. And then you can kind of see where they need a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. Because PR and social media work really well together, but they work really well together when they're meaningful. I've worked with some healthcare organizations that I felt got it wrong. Sorry, healthcare organizations, but they were pretty much going for, okay, we're going to do a press release. Okay, I moved 2 steps to the left, press release. 2 steps to the right, press release. And then the social media was focused on something completely different. They weren't complementary messaging. And I feel that PR can still exude that human side that social media can exude, so that there's an emotional play that I think a lot of people miss out on. I'm not saying everything's an emotional angle, but do you know what I'm saying?
I think so. So in other words, I think a lot of times people, and just tell me if I'm understanding you correctly, I think a lot of times clients think, oh, I'll use social media for the touchy-feely human stuff, and I'll use the media strictly for news. And what I hear you saying is there's an opportunity to sometimes do human interest stories in the news, or pull some of that messaging that you're using as part of the brand narrative into the PR side of things. Is that more or less what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And also one of the things I think too is that as a PR professional or as a social professional, by working together, you're able to instantly delight them with social media results, where PR results can take, well, maybe really good quality, the big hits that they want. They come to you and like, oh, get me on Dr. Oz, get me on Oprah, get me on the normal asks. Yeah.
Today Show.
The Today Show. It's amazing, but still, they can get with having some sort of a social media initiative that's complementing that PR angle. What they're able to do is to affect the narrative instantly while they're trying to cultivate those media leads. So it's a full campaign. And guess what else they can do? They can do some advertising to drive website traffic. Oh, guess what? They can do conversion elements on their website. Because what they'll say is, usually it's, when I've worked in publicity in the past, it was business authors that were just basically like, I need to get me on the Today Show, and then my whole entire funnel is going to work. And it's that, again, adorable, but not the truth, right? It's not the truth. There's lots of marketing elements you need to employ.
So you must have a lot of clients come to you and say, they think they know the strategy and they just want you to implement Instagram, right? Or TikTok or something. And then you have to look at them and say, well, no, but yes. So like, how do you navigate that and steer them to the right channels?
I guess I've become a little weathered in how I respond to that. Since we've been around for 11 years, it's 10 years ago, Chris would answer by saying, well, let's look at something maybe different. And then if the person didn't come around to what I was saying, I'd be like, okay, well, I'll do my best. I won't take the client on if they don't take my advice. If you're coming to me for my expertise. If you don't like what I have to say, I completely respect that. Go somewhere else. And that's kind of what I do now, because I do feel that there's a lot of people out there. Like 10 years ago, Chris was taking on that work when he really shouldn't have taken it on, because those people should have put that money somewhere else.
Mhm.
So ethically, it makes me look like a jerk sometimes, but I would rather be a jerk where that business can go on and find the right answer, rather than the jerk that they start to resent because I'm sucking up all of their budget, you know?
Mhm.
Not getting the results that they want. Yeah.
But what they'll do is they will just start taking you down this road that's not exactly the right road, and trying to get them focused on the right thing, I think, is sometimes one of the most challenging things. Because what they'll say is, oh, Chris, I want visibility. I want visibility is all I want. I said, okay, so visibility is the only thing that you want. Your whole business, the world is built on visibility. That's what it's running on, right? I mean, what like dimension are we in here, folks? You want something else. So be honest, ask for what you want. And I told them, I'm like, oh, excellent. Visibility and credibility too, right? You want to be credible, right? Okay, those are the top things. You want to spend $10,000 a month on a social media campaign for credibility and visibility. You're gonna need some leads, because credibility and visibility are like Chinese food. You're gonna be hungry in 30 minutes. And when I say that, it slaps them a little bit so they understand, oh, this is marketing. This is marketing and sales.
Right.
So it's like, you know.
Or anybody can go out and spend money and pay to get followers, but that doesn't mean they're good followers either.
Oh my God, that's such a good point, because what happened the other day, oh my God. Someone was talking to me, it was a potential client, and they were saying, can you, oh, so Instagram, I'm killing it on Instagram. And so immediately, as soon as someone says something that is like a really, really huge statement, I'm looking it up while they're on the phone with me. So I'm looking it up, and I'm looking for their Instagram account. They had like 17,000 followers. They were following, I don't know, like 800 people. They had all these posts, every single post, no engagement, no comments, nothing. Daddy knows you purchased those.
Yeah.
And so I could see that. I said, wow. I said, this looks like you bought all of your followers. I said, is that what you did? And they're like, yeah. Well, wasn't that a good strategy? No, that's not a strategy.
So here's one for you, Chris. Have you ever heard of clients purchasing an existing Instagram account with engaged followers that is going to be abandoned and is instead reallocated to a new brand?
Ugh. No, that sounds filthy though. It sounds filthy. It's like wearing someone else's wedding dress like the day after. I mean, it's like, it just seems wrong.
I've heard of it. I think it's being done more and more these days, actually.
Well, you know what? I'm sure there's people doing that. I mean, they're trying to build up this big engaged account, and then they can sell it for big money. I mean, it makes sense.
I think the dollar amount I heard for this one in question was $18,000.
Wow.
What was it? A certain, what was the vertical?
I'm trying to keep this a little bit veiled. It's in the wellness space.
Okay.
I don't know if I have a good example, but it'd be a little bit like if there was, McDonald's wanted to sell their Instagram account and Burger King took it over, and just started using it as their own, and just like,
right.
It's maybe it's more like Long John Silver's. It's not like apples to apples, so it's even a little bit weirder.
I mean, I guess people, sell URLs. I wonder, do you see that as being similar or different?
Similar. I think the only difference is that the power for me would be from the audience. So the engagement level of the audience. So if they're like a micro that have 10,000 followers, and every single post gets 3,000 somethings, I mean, that's attractive. That's why I think like 18,000 seems low to me, depending on what it looks like, that account, in terms of the numbers and engagement. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, if you want one of those Kardashian creatures to do something on Instagram, they charge a lot of money.
Kardashian creatures.
Yeah, both with the K.
Did you make that up?
Yeah.
Of course you did.
No, because it's so funny, because I have to use them sometimes for me to really help a client understand what influencers are. Because I would say, who's influencers? And they're just like, well, so what do? Do they like, I said, yeah, they go around and like, hey, want some cigarette? I mean, like, they're not like pushers. Like, they're just people that are endorsing you. They're endorsing people. And I will use the Kardashian as an example, for sure.
That's funny. So, Chris, you do influencer relations as well, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, have you heard about this? Was news to me, but I don't know if it's news to you. Probably not. But I recently spoke to a client who had an interesting influencer strategy where they were starting by identifying like the top influencers they really, really wanted. Mm-hmm. Then they were finding, okay, 10 to 15 people that influencer's following, sending them product first so that top influencer would start to see these things bubble up in their feed. And then maybe a month or two later, go to the big fish, the big tuna, and say, hey, we like to offer you product. Have you heard of that? Is that something, it seemed to be very effective for this particular client?
Well, I mean, it sounds like an interesting strategy. I feel that it seems so long. It's because the whole influencer process is miserable. I'll be honest. I mean, I hate doing it. I can do it. I know how to do it. It's not fun. It's like herding cats. So basically, there's no rules. There's no, hey, $20 for an ad, 24-hour post. But no, you're like brokering with these people that have no business sense. And it's absolutely ridiculous. That's why some people really charge a lot for it. That's why when people come to us and they say, what can you guarantee in terms of influencers? And it's like, I can't guarantee anything. For example, like February 15th versus March 15th, it was a totally different world. Right. And even like going at September 15th to October 15th is going to be totally different. So it changes. They change too. They change their habits. They change what they're looking at. They change. So right now, there's no guarantee.
All right. So here's another one for you, Chris.
Yeah.
Do you have any good examples of where you felt like social media and PR really played well in the sandbox together and made each other better and stronger and faster? And or examples where there were missed opportunities because there was a chance to amplify one or the other by coupling them and that wasn't done?
PR and social media always work well together when they are actually introduced to each other by a client at some point during the initial part of the campaign. That's always wonderful. It's always awful to find out, and I really feel like it's awful, to know that there's members of the team that you've never heard about until 3 months into a campaign. I hate that because I feel like there's missed opportunities and that drives me crazy because I'm solving a puzzle and I didn't know that there was a whole other layer of this puzzle. Right. And that drives me crazy. So one of the clients that I was working with, I introduced them to a PR and they were in senior living. And I wanted them to really explore the opportunities and PR because just to kind of get knowledgeable about what it was. And I had an expert that was a specialist in senior living and assisted living and memory care and all that kind of good stuff. And they actually conversed and through the sales conversation and the sales talk that they had, they understood and they locked on to the concept. So then they said, okay, well, we don't have anything we don't have a need right now, but we're going to grab you when we need you. Well, I can sense stuff happening because social media, you can it's like getting putting your ear to the railroad tracks. Like I can hear it coming because I knew who this person was and I was in touch with him. I said, get a story out immediately. And this was just when COVID hit. And I knew that it was going to be like a wave crashing on these places. So you have to get ahead of that story because I know the client that I was talking to in particular is taking all the precautions. And not only were they taking them, they were leaders, but they're like, oh, where's a bushel? I got to put all my stories under this. It's like, no, you got to talk about it. How about that you've come up with this whole interactive way to play games with family members during this quarantine time? How that you're doing they're doing bake sales and they're doing all these cute things that are just like really touching. I was talking to the PR guy. We're working angles. And I said, well, why don't you what do you want to do for media? And he said, well, I want to do a personal interest story. I want to talk about some residents and their family members. We're going to pitch this to the local television channels. I was like, great. I'm going to go and reach out to the local television channels and try to get their name in front of them with some posts and just start following them and engaging them. And then we had a whole thing together. After they had that story, they fired a couple of employees, and the reviews that they were getting on Google were super negative. But guess what? All they had to do was stoke that story again. And that story just flamed up. Everyone was in love with them, was writing beautiful reviews, and
it pushed the bad stuff down.
Totally.
Wow.
And I was fielding, my team was fielding, I'll just take credit from it. I was doing everything. But my team was working through those reviews, changing their minds, getting people to look over here, focusing on the positive. And so that was a time when I really felt like it worked together. And then after they got the media, we repurposed all the videos. We boosted all the videos through social media advertising. It was like, we put it in email marketing. If I could have like got the videos on VHS and threw them at people, I would have done it. Like, we were really aggressively promoting it. But that's a good way. When PR doesn't work well with social media, I think I've only experienced that when I haven't been introduced, or PR feels like it's social media. So I've had clients that I've worked with, and the PR were so far off point with what the storyline should have been with the client, that the social media never landed, because the PR was so strong in their angle. And it was basically talking about, it was a healthcare company that we worked for, or maybe a nutrition company would be more along the lines. And we were trying to position the doctor that was endorsing it as the main spokesperson. They were doing a completely different person. And this person could not talk on camera, could not be interviewed, was not photogenic. There was nothing about them that popped. My guy, boom, he would light up the stage. He was engaging, he was credibility. He was good. But yeah, that didn't work out so well, because I could never get them to understand, because they felt that they understood what the social media angle should have been.
I like it. So here's another one for you, and then we should let you ask us questions if you have any. Have you seen people that are really, really good at social media that think they can do PR and it doesn't go well?
Yeah.
And have you also seen PR people think they can do social media and then seen that they have no idea what they're doing? And if so, I'd love to hear the examples.
Oh yeah. PR people that think they can do social media. I had a conversation with a rather haughty PR person about 2 weeks ago. And there's like a note that these people hit, and it's like a one note. And after talking to them for like 3 minutes, you got the whole story. You know how they treat their clients, how they deal it. They're talking about how busy they are. They're talking about how all these famous things that they've done and all this great. And it's just like, oh, I just said hello. You know what I mean? You're volunteering all this stuff. I think you're a jerk. So so not that I'm here to judge. I'm just here to know my limits. Like, I got to know what I'm dealing with. So anyway, that person individually was talking about social media marketing. Oh, that's right. You wanted to talk about that. Yeah, I do social media. I said, oh, really? Excellent. So what clients, you were mentioning all these amazing clients that you had. It was like the people behind milk and beef, like the biggest brands ever. And she was like, oh, well, here's one. I do all this and I do all that. And I was just like, okay. And then I just like put a quarter in her, and then she kept on going, because you could, it's like, so tell me about your history. Okay, I'm gonna go Google this. So I'm like finding the social media, and I open the accounts. 3 posts in 3 months. Each one of them is a press release. And that's for social media marketing. I was like, hey, Linda, this is not probably the approach we want. No, false name. But yeah, that's what I find a lot. It's that they'll post 3 or 4 times, and that's social media marketing. They're not focused on any sort of audience growth. If there's comments on that post, they completely ignore it. The logo is all out of size, so it's all cut off in the circle or wherever the icon is. The cover is like of Antonio Banderas from 20 years ago. And it's like, what are we even looking at? This is like a mess.
Right.
That's what I found with people that really lean in heavily. So I found that a negative. Now talk about social media people that say they do PR. That's another one. Generally, a stereotypical social media marketer understands all of the tenets of PR and what goes into a campaign, but does not understand the intensity of the media relations and pitching process and the idiosyncrasies of it and the relationship management. So they feel like, oh, all I'm doing is developing angles. Huh, aren't I something special? No, and I'm going to go, okay, how can I get to PR Newswire and get that out? And guess what? These social media marketers will sell that service for like $4,000, $5,000, do one release, and it'll get all of those internet pickups. We know what that looks like. And it's like, MSN News, Holland. It's like none of them make any sense. And it's just like,
and it's just the press release, right? It's just the press release reposted.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's not a story.
It's not a story at all.
Right.
It's a byline article. It's just basically the press release with the masthead and everything. It looks terrible.
Agreed.
So.
Love it. So do you have any questions for us?
Yeah. Okay. So when you're pitching local versus national, how, and I don't care where you want to take this, which one do you find is more direct? Do you feel that even at the local level, there's more layers to kind of peel back in order to get your story placed? Or do you find that national, if you have a relationship that's really strong, you can get kind of right through to any sort of placement?
Yeah, no, I love local media. I've had a lot of success with, people who were super indie musicians. The two are coming to mind that would have never gotten national coverage really otherwise. Nothing as meaningful as these local opportunities in local newspapers or local radio. And it's very nice and collegial, and everybody's sort of like in the game together, because
cool.
The local media really cares about these people because they could basically be living next door to them.
Yeah.
For one of the clients I was just talking about, it's been a little tough because what you would normally do with a musician is do local PR around the country depending on where they were performing. And nobody's performing anywhere. So it got completely cut out, or it's eliminated a whole aspect of media relations for those kinds of people.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting.
But I haven't had the experience of a local media person, reporter meaning, write something and then go to their editor and have the editor can it. I think that they always get pre-approval. I've never experienced it the other way around. I have, however, at the national level, had somebody write the story or do the interview and start writing, and you think it's coming out, and then all of a sudden Digital Trends is like, actually my editor they don't want to put the story through.
Yeah.
You're like, what? It's like, oh God, like we already, did a briefing document and a pre-interview, debrief with the CEO and got his time and did the interview, and it's like, you couldn't have checked before. God. So that definitely happens at the national level a lot more in terms of layering. Human interest stories, I think, are a lot more salient in local media, kind of to Laura's point. Sometimes you can pull them off at the national level, but they have to be pretty interesting.
Oh,
right?
they have to be like major celebrity.
They either have to be really famous or really unusual human interest stories. For example, I got one for a woman who is a psychologist specializing in PTSD who survived the Las Vegas massacre and then went through PTSD herself and had to basically continue counseling people with PTSD while suffering PTSD from going through this event, right? I mean, I got her in People magazine because that's interesting. Like that's really like next level. And that's a great story.
Well, going back to a point that you made earlier, April, you had those pre-interviews for that, for the national placement. You had everyone all lined up, and then it doesn't happen. So the client must feel crushed, or they must have a certain type of feeling. What do you set them up for this type of situation, or do you have to pick up the pieces when this does happen?
Both. We try to prepare them in advance and not get them too excited and have them understand it's a process. And that way, if it does fall through, it's not the end of the world. But I mean, sometimes you just have to say, listen, this chick was going to write a story for you for Inc. magazine, and then she moved to Business Insider, and we pitched her over at Business Insider, and she's still interested, but the Inc. story's gotten canned because it didn't get published before she left.
That sucks.
And the client understands, because what can you do? It's out of your control, and they understand it's earned media, right? We're not paying for this. We can't. There's no guarantee here. But it's still the last thing you want to have to tell a client, especially if it was usually it's not hours of interviews, but even if it's a half hour and they're busy executives, like, oh.
Right. Well,
Sorry.
how do you, and this is another thing too that comes up quite often. How do you deal with the client that calls you every other day and says, "Where's my placements?"
That's a good one. Laura, take that one.
You look like you're into that one, Laura. I'm just saying.
I don't, you know what? I don't personally have clients that do that because I am so amazing. Manage the client ahead of time.
Okay.
I mean, that's really right. And I do that all the time, and April does that all the time. And I've had discussions with a lot of PR people, since the pandemic has hit, and it's just been such a strange time. And so what people are doing, to the point of what you do, is like coming to them with like, well, let's do like a bigger sort of, content play. Let's talk about like what other kinds of writing that we can do. We'll update your website. We'll write messaging. We'll connect you with somebody who does social media, those kinds of, like, we'll do something for you so that you're improving yourself, you're doing communications. And when this kind of goes back to whatever normal that's going to be, you've already moved down the field and you're like ready to hit the ground running.
Well, Chris, I feel like we've kept you over time, so I appreciate I don't want to, cut you short. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners, or any pieces of advice to leave with young people about anything, things we've discussed, things that they should, or even about ways to manage up? I know we've had some discussions recently about management.
I mean, honestly, I think that if you're going into any sort of marketing type career, whether you're dealing with media or just online media, I think you never stop learning. So you need to know that I would never consider myself an expert or a guru because I don't know everything. And I think that I'm a specialist. I specialize in this, and I continue to grow and I continue to learn. If you have that collaborative spirit, you can then grow creatively with your team really closely. And that's one of the things that I really treasure. And I think one of the things to speak to younger people that are starting out, understand when you're in a really good situation. You know what I mean? You could be working with a wonderful boss who's looking after you and is trying to do everything for you. And the grass is greener because the paycheck is higher. But then everything else that made that first job amazing is gone. Yep. Understand that that's part of growing, but you can always come back to that at some state if you do make that decision. So it's not the end of the journey. But other than that, hire the Go agency. I mean, there you go.
Nothing like a shameless plug to end on.
Yeah. I mean, I want to break character,
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Chris. It's been a pleasure as always.
Yeah. And Laura, nice to meet you.
You too. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
Bye. He's funny, huh?
Yeah, he's awesome.
Oh my gosh. Let's start with what not to do from PR pros who know. So what not to do is assume your supervisor is there to serve you. Now, that doesn't mean that your supervisor shouldn't be helpful and you shouldn't expect that. But it does mean that there's an art to managing up that I think is something that once you get under your belt as a young professional, then you can apply to clients.
Yes.
And I think that, go ahead.
No, you're right. And I, it's not something that most people just know. It's like, don't assume that somebody knows what you're talking about, client or supervisor. So when you're emailing them, you need to give like a little bit of the backstory and be very specific what you're talking about, because maybe your supervisor didn't read all of the emails regarding what you're talking about, nor your clients. So you need to be very explicit, and you also don't want to cause your supervisor or your client to have to go do extra work. That's your job.
Right. Because people do this with clients too, right? Where it's like, well, they didn't give me anything to pitch. It's like, what? Like, no, go get something to pitch. Like,
Right,
you
that's your
come,
job.
that's your job. You come to them with ideas proactively, you know? And I think it's the same for junior people with senior people. You know, I always find that the junior people who are coming to me and saying, hey, I was thinking about this as a story angle. What do you think? Hey, I was thinking about doing this. What do you think? And you're like, yes, you know, like, go get it.
Right, I know. Most of
and,
the times you say yes, right?
and most of the time, and every once in a blue moon, it's like, oh God, that wouldn't really work because you didn't the fact that the client's sensitive to XYZ.
Right.
But more often than not, it's like, you do it, you know? So I think it's good training because that's the way that you want to be with your clients, going to them proactively. You know, when you're no longer a junior person and you're running the account yourself, you want to be that person who's got a lot of experience of coming and saying, hey, we're thinking about this. Do you have this new angle? What about this angle? Have you thought about this? Could we do this? And they can always say no, and they will, but at least if you come to them with ideas all the time, you know, 1 in 5 is going to stick at least.
But what do you think the supervisor's responsibility is in that, in encouraging the junior people to come up with their ideas and maybe helping them to understand what kind of ideas that they might be able to devise or how they should be thinking about things? You know what I mean? Like, I think that you can't just be like, well, think of something.
Well, one thing that we do is we have people that, as part of their to-dos for the week, and they're going to send us everything they're working on, everything they did last week. And then one of the things they're challenged to do every week is come up with a creative idea for a client. So that could just be something that they've thought of. Just as I know personally, when I have an agenda to put together for even for the all agency meetings, I already, as soon as I hear that thing that I think is a good idea, I make note of it and I put it in the agenda, right? So I think it's that, just even having that, there's, I got to think, this is going to work well. And then it helps them capture that idea when they have it, rather than just sort of let it fly by and it goes away. So I think just encouraging them to proactively come up with things is one way of encouraging that thought process to get in that flow. I mean, I'm a big fan of managing through example. So obviously,
I was going to say that, yeah.
You know, it's important to show them that you're always coming up with those ideas. And
or telling them to watch somebody else, you know, who works with them that might be a little more experienced, like what they do or how they think about things. Yeah.
Right. And how do they keep the account spinning and everything running and hits coming in the door, even if the client's, you know, impossible to pin down, not giving us answers, and there's no news, right? Because even if all 3 of those things are true, that doesn't mean that we can sit on our hands and just, you know, collect the retainer money and hope that nobody's going to notice. It's like,
right.
Not how it works. So I think that's most of what I have to say on that. Do you have any other?
No, I guess, I mean, like I said, I guess I feel like since I didn't get a whole lot of mentoring most of the time, I feel like it's the supervisor's role to help the more junior person help themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And then if you do that, then hopefully what you get back is helpful to everybody. And so that's the thing about PR. You got to always be thinking and coming up with new ideas all the time. You're never done. You're never like, oh, thank God we're done. Ever.
Right. No, and another good technique that I know somebody junior to use effectively is getting time on my calendar or on other supervisors' calendars proactively, the same way you would book something with a client, right? So it's like, my client is my supervisor, and there's that mindset. And so then suddenly it's like, if I need to do that, then I need to schedule a meeting and I need to come and say, hey, here are the things I'm working on. Here's what I'm struggling with. What do you think about this? Is this the appropriate number of hours for this account, or whatever it is, right? If they don't have the answers, rather than just waiting, this particular individual will actually schedule something and say, even just go to my Calendly and book it, and then just show up and like present to me as though I'm the client with her agenda and go through it. And I always appreciate that, right? Because it shows that she's both good at, if she's good at doing that with me, then you know that she's in prime position to be able to run accounts, and so it shows that there's a proactivity to managing her time and managing up that crosses over well. It's true. So did you hear about the PR fail of the week?
No, April, what is that?
Okay, so you heard about Netflix and this whole thing about cuties, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there was a movie, Cuties, that ended up becoming very controversial. It led to a viral petition. Netflix is currently encouraging subscribers to watch the award-winning French film Cuties, despite a petition to remove the film and the trending hashtag cancel Netflix. Netflix issued an apology for the, quote, inappropriate artwork promoting the film, which follows 11-year-old Amy's struggle to find her identity amid contrasting cultures. A day after the film debuted on the streaming service, the hashtag cancel Netflix and hashtag boycott Netflix were trending on social media. Netflix responded to the criticism in a statement provided to USA Today on Friday. Cuties is a social commentary against the sexualization of young children. It's an award-winning film and a powerful story about the pressure young girls face on social media and from society more generally growing up, and we'd encourage anyone who cares about these important issues to watch the movie. But by Sunday, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican from Texas, had doubled down on his criticism of the movie.
So you watched it?
I did. I saw the clips that people were very upset about, and out of context, they're especially alarming. I think the one thing that I wonder about is if this is really about demonstrating that there is, a problem with the sexualization of young girls. Like, there was this question in my mind of, like, did you really have to do this, like, music video style close-up shots of crotches of 11-year-olds dancing to make the point? Because you're kind of sexualizing them in the process of making the point. So it's a little bit like, can you really claim that was the point of it? I mean, I think Netflix did the spin that they had to do, and I think that's the best they could have come out with. Like, that's the crisis move, right?
So
that's a messaging option. But it's like, you watch the film and you're not like, this isn't about that. This is like about a coming of age and a finding your identity and, exploring other realms because you have pain in your heart about your current existence. And I mean, it was,
oh wow,
it wasn't really about like the over sexualization of children. I mean, if it was meant to be an expose on that, I don't think it landed.
But did it make more people watch it? Would you have watched it if you hadn't heard about that?
No.
Right. That's what gross advertising is about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, Calvin Klein perfume and commercials, right? With like naked women. Like, what does that have to do with perfume? It doesn't matter. It makes people want to buy it. I mean, I know I'm going back about 30 years, but you know what I'm saying. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's definitely created a dialogue about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's too bad. So this is my perspective on, and I guess it's sort of a cultural PR thing, that it's, to me, I feel like women have taken steps backwards since the 80s regarding how they're perceived. I think that there was a lot gained probably quickly in the 60s, and then that was going into the 70s and 80s, and then something sort of went, and it might have been like reality TV with Paris Hilton and, the sex tapes and the Kardashians and all of that were like, no, girls and women, you're supposed to look like this. Okay, now you're not supposed to look like that anymore. Now you're supposed to look like this. And it's so over the top and it's so ostentatious and there's so much money. And it's never about being who you are. It's always being somebody else who actually is very full of money and or plastic surgery. And I just didn't get those strong kinds of messages when I was very young.
Mm-hmm. And then so I was thinking about this as I'm watching it. So I was like, were these girls already doing these dance moves, or were they trained to do this for the movie? And then, of course, then it raises the question: okay, were they actually harmed in the making the movie, or were they
Right.
already ingrained in this?
Anyway, I guess we're off the PR topic, but we always get into these political or, feminist-ish type topics because it is cultural, right? And it does impact everything that everybody does and how they think and what they're interested in reading about or writing about, right?
True. I agree. So what does have to do with PR is our PR news of the week.
The interesting moment of the week?
Yeah, PR news of the week.
So I love this because I'm a sugar addict, and Jelly Belly, the little jelly beans that taste like different flavors, their founder created a Willy Wonka style contest with the candy factory as the grand prize, but their website for tickets crashed because it was so overwhelmed, but apparently it's working again. In Willy Wonka the movie, you just had to buy a candy bar and hope that you got the golden ticket, but I guess in this case you're actually buying, so they're making money off of it.
Wait, so how does one receive a candy factory as a grand prize? What does that actually mean?
Well, I'm reading it. They're going to have a treasure hunt where the winner will receive a key to one of their candy factories. And those who participate will get a riddle regarding the location of where the gold style tickets will be hidden in the form of necklaces. This is on their press release.
It's very involved.
Yes, treasure hunts will be set up state by state, and the first clue will be unveiled September 30th in Georgia. Each state is limited to 1,000 participants and has one golden ticket.
Each state is limited to 1,000 participants.
Yeah, so and each one has one, so I guess each state has one golden ticket, so I don't know, you find 50? Are we counting Puerto Rico as a state? Maybe 51? And then I guess you get a key to one of their factories. I don't think it means you own it. I think it's ceremonial.
Right, no, the way that it's phrased, you win a candy factory?
It's sort of like getting a key to the city. You don't get the city.
Right. No, but it's very clever. It's like a classic old PR, campaign.
Stunt, right.
Stunt. Yeah, I love working on those. I think it would be super fun to do. Very inventive.
I still eat candy like that, from back in the day. It's not as good as it used to be. They make everything smaller.
Well, on that note, should we kick it into encouraging everyone to please email us anonymous horror stories about your firm, experience, bosses, etc. You can also, Laura said she will take positive stories as well. I
will.
We will promise not to reveal anything revealing that would reveal your identity or your agency.
We won't reveal anything revealing that will reveal you.
Yeah, exactly what Laura said. And on that note, thank you for joining us for the PR Wind Down.
And many thanks to our guest for an awesome conversation.
It was awesome.
He was great. And we will hear you or see you next time on the PR Wind Down.
Can't wait to wind down with you again soon.